Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today on Kingdom Builder TV. So glad to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Getting ready for Thanksgiving.
Oh, same here, same here.
Yeah.
I always have a full house here. I host every year, so we will have a full house here. But I'm always thankful to have a house full of people here on Thanksgiving. It's always a highlight of my year.
Agreed. It's a blessing.
Well, so Ashley, for those who might not be familiar with you, you are the granddaughter of the late President Ronald Reagan. And for those who might not be familiar with you and what you do, why don't you take a moment and tell us about yourself?
So my dad is Michael Reagan, who is the oldest son from my grandpa's first marriage to my grandma Jane Wyman, who was also an actress. And my brother and I are the only grandkids. So we feel like it's kind of been our duty to keep his legacy alive. And we've also had the fortunate um, we've had the ability to be involved in a lot of things with the library, with the USS Ronald Reagan, with the foundation that my dad and I run to kind of be able to keep his legacy alive and do the best we can to let people know about him and all the amazing things he stood for. But I was born in 1983. So I was born during his first term in office. So my story is a little bit, I was born at a Secret Service. My dad always tells the story how that's when my mom knew that I was the last baby that was going to be born because she had Secret Service in the delivery room with her. And we had Secret Service during those first years. So I was about 6. And I had them through elementary school. They went to school, kindergarten and first grade with my brother and I. And then after he was out of office, our lives kind of went back to normal for the most part. He led a pretty private life after that. And then I went to school, graduated. Now I'm the principal at a Catholic elementary school. So I've been in education now 18 years. I taught for 15, and then it's my 3rd year now in administration. I got married a few years ago, actually at the Reagan Ranch.
Hmm.
It's a cool little legacy. And so now I'm just keeping busy.
It sounds pretty cool. I can't imagine, I've seen movies, there's a movie First Kid, the Disney movie and stuff about
Yeah.
the Secret Service following the kid around. What was that like? Was that like kind of strange when you're like kind of like every move you make is you've got somebody watching over you and stuff?
Yeah, you don't realize I didn't realize it wasn't normal until it wasn't around anymore.
Right.
I tell people I didn't realize that my grandpa was this. There were sort of 2 different times when I realized he was more than just my grandpa. And I remember that's when I went to high school because I had been with the same kids from kindergarten through 8th grade at the school I was at. So they knew I had Secret Service. The families knew we had Secret Service. No one ever talked about it. And I remember when I made that transition to high school, all of a sudden, every single class I was in was, oh, Ashley Reagan, are you related to Ronald Reagan? Oh, Ashley Reagan, are you related to Ronald Reagan? And then some people believe you, some people don't believe you. Some people then want to tell you their voting history of their parents, so it opens up kind of this whole thing. And
Yeah.
I think that's when I first realized, oh, not everybody has Secret Service growing up. And then it was when he passed away. That's when I think I realized, because he was so private after he was in office. So all of our time spent with him was either at his office in Century City or at the house. And all of a sudden, when he passed away, I think I realized the magnitude of people's love and admiration for him. I'll never forget, we were if you're familiar with Los Angeles, we were on the 405 freeway, which is jam-packed every day with people. And cars were parked. People were sitting on top of their cars saluting as we were going in the motorcade. And I think that's when I realized the impact that he had left.
Yeah, and I'm you and I are about the same age. I was born in 1980, so I'm 44 now, but I remember, some of my earliest memories as far as politics go. I remember being in 2nd grade, and there was a picture that my teacher had in the classroom of your grandfather wearing a cowboy hat, and that always stuck out in my mind. And the more I found out about him, the more I liked him. And he's always been one of my favorite presidents. You and I were talking pre-interview that I feel that your grandfather did more for this country than any other president that came after him. And to me, that's a solid legacy. And it's just it's crazy when you look back on stuff like that now. and you have those profound memories. And you growing up with him, you said that he was a private person, after he left office, and I can easily see how that would he'd want that, because his whole life from when he was in film. And by the way, I didn't realize until probably about 15 years ago that he was an actor before he was a president. I just assumed that he was always in politics,
In
but
politics. Yeah.
the more I found out about him, the more I'm like, wow. And it was funny because I remember hearing that line in the Back to the Future movie when he said that Ronald Reagan was a president in 1985.
Yeah,
He's
when
like,
they go,
"Sure." I thought that was funny, and I never picked up on that. And then I realized, I'm like, wow, he that wasn't just a line. He really was that. But
yeah.
I just remember that. I remember that. And the more I, found out about him, going back and even looking at his speeches, the comment that he made to Gorbachev about tearing down the wall in East Germany, I remember stuff like that. And it's like, I don't remember everything about other presidencies, but those were profound things I remember from when I was younger that still hold a place in my mind now. I think that's cool. So, looking back after he left office, are there any memories of him that you'd like to share with us today? Like things that kind of stick out in your mind that, you remember about spending time with him and stuff back then?
I mean, I remember, to speak on what you just said a little bit, I think he had a way of, I mean, we lived in a different time. There's rarely somebody I meet on either side of the aisle, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, that don't have positive things to say about him. I mean, he was kind of that unifying, especially in his second term. He was that unifying president where, I don't think people could argue the amazing things that he was doing and making and for this country. So you rarely meet, where nowadays, I think as a teacher, you could never have a picture of a president on your desk at school. It'd be very polarizing, right? So
Yeah.
I think he just stood for a lot of things that it was hard to argue. People saw that on either side. And memories of him, I mean, after he was out of office, speaking of Thanksgiving coming up, so every Thanksgiving we always spent at the ranch. That's probably where 90% of our memories is being at the ranch. We spent Thanksgiving there every year, riding horses with him. If you've seen the movie or seen parts of it, I mean, riding horses with him is what we all did. That's what my dad grew up on, was on his ranch. And that's what we did with him. Other things was, he had a house, him and my grandma, their house in Bel Air that they moved to after he was out of office. That's where we spent so we spent Christmas every year. And we would go up there every Sunday. And a lot of those memories are him reading. He loved to read and tell stories. And that I started from early on and continued. And then also swimming. We would go up there and swim with him for hours. And as he progressed into Alzheimer's, he would still want to go swimming, and he'd want to pick the leaves out of the pool that had fallen from the tree. And sometimes you'd just spend hours doing that because it'd be very repetitive, or he'd read you the same story multiple times. But it was one of those things where those were the things that he loved. And even as he got sicker and sicker with Alzheimer's, you could see those were still the things that brought him joy.
Yeah, and I have seen the film. It's a phenomenal film. The film actually stars Dennis Quaid, who plays your grandfather in the film. Did a phenomenal
Yeah.
job. And I'm always curious, because when you watch a movie that's based on a real life person, you always got to kind of wonder, how accurate is this? What kind of like, were there a lot of creative liberties used for a film? But people that I've talked to and articles I've read, this film is pretty spot on about who he was in real life. When you saw this, when you saw the finished film and stuff, what was your opinion of how they did this film? Did they do it justice? Did they do your grandfather justice with this film?
Yes, I think we collectively, my entire family, I think felt they did him justice. Dennis Quaid was incredible. I think taking on, and they've done different spoofs on Netflix and different things where you've seen like, different actors kind of portraying him certain ways. And I think it could very much be a little bit of like a caricature, where I think Dennis Quaid really studied him, and I think respected him, and I think wanted to bring that into the film. But I know my dad had been in talks with the producer, the director of the film, I would say up to almost 15 years ago. He's been
Mm.
sharing stories with them. And there's a lot of stories that come out in the movie that my dad were the ones that that provided that information because he had had those private conversations with my grandpa. So it was really neat to see those come out. But he had been working with the producers and directors probably upwards of almost 15 years on developing the story, and it was spot on. There's nothing in there that was not accurate, which I appreciated because you never know with Hollywood if they're going to go try to add a bunch of fluff, right? To make it more entertaining, more people will come see it if we add this and we add that, where it was pretty much just a factual portrayal of him starting as an actor, but wanting to defeat communism, wanting to
Yeah.
defeat it in Hollywood, wanting to defeat it once he became president, which was his goal. And so I just thought that it was excellent. And Penelope Ann Miller portraying my grandma Nancy, she did an incredible job as well. So
Yeah, she did. I hadn't seen her in a film in a long time. You know, I grew
me
up watching
either.
like in twin or not twins, Kindergarten
Kindergarten
Cop
Cop.
and
Yeah, when I saw her, I
Adventures in
said kindergarten
Babysitting
cop.
and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
when I saw her, I actually didn't recognize her at first. I'm like, oh wow, that's
Yeah.
Penelope Ann Miller. I haven't seen her in a film in a long time. But yeah, I got a chance to talk to Dennis last year, and he touched on the Reagan film. He wasn't able to really tell me a whole lot because they were still in the writer's strike then, but
Yeah.
uh, he said you're going to want to see this Reagan film. He said it's an
Yeah.
amazing film, and he said that he was super excited to be a part of the production of that. So I'm sure with you guys, you know, having somebody like of that caliber play your grandfather's a character, I'm sure that
Yeah.
that was probably exciting to see on film.
Just the respect he had and the overall, I mean, the wanting to learn about him and wanting to know who he was as a man and as a person and as a grandpa, as a dad. And so much of it, they used a lot of real footage. So him getting when he was shot, that they used that as real footage. You know, in some of the speeches they used the real footage. So it was so incredibly historically accurate that I just think it's important for everybody to go see. And it's
Yeah, and I
also very relevant, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I really liked about the film and the really the aspect of his life that I really didn't know a whole lot about was his faith, was his Christian faith, and that's something that the movie really portrays and kind of puts out there. Now, you know, looking back, you know, uh, faith played an important role in his life, not only personally but during his presidency. How do you think that shaped his life and his time in office?
I think I think he was a man that, I mean, I think with regards to even his legacy now, I think you look at somebody and they can say that they believe everything that they believe, right? But you look at how they are as a man, how they are as a person, and how they live out their life. And I think the reason he has a legacy he does today is because it wasn't only the words that he was speaking, but it was how he lived his life. It was everything he did was a testament to his faith, his actions, how he spoke to people, how he treated people, what he wanted to accomplish. He was never afraid to talk about his faith. I mean, you see it in speeches he gave. He would talk about his faith. He would have prayers. So you just saw it, I think, in every aspect of his presidency versus him just snippets of him, in church on Sunday. It was embedded into every aspect of what he did. And I think as growing up, it was always very important to him. And then we grew up in a very faith-filled, household, which was largely in part to him and my grandma Jane, my dad's mom. She was also very much that way. And so I think he lived out everything that he also spoke. And I think that's what we look for even today, right? You see people and you can say a lot of things, but we look at how are you living your life? How are you treating other people? Are you living a God-filled life? Are you treating other people you know, as Jesus would, kind of thing?
Amen. Yeah, and I know that this, you know, going into this last question about legacy, I know that your dad would probably be one that probably had conversations with him about legacy and what he wanted future generations to see him portrayed at. But was there ever a moment in those later years when he was out of office when did he ever pull you aside and say, you know, Ashley, this is what I want to be remembered for? You know, the work that you and your father do now with your grandfather's legacy, I think it's important being able to keep that alive and being able to point people to the things, the changes that he made while he was here. But did he ever have a conversation with you and, you know, tell you what he wanted people to remember himself more for the most?
Not a conversation I would say that was explicit like that, but I think that was just also in part to who he was, kind of his humility that he spoke to. He thought he was just kind of a regular guy
Mm.
that then went on and did these extraordinary things. So I don't know. I think he would be shocked I think he would be shocked to see that his legacy is what it is today, that he is, especially now in the climate. I feel like he's almost more popular today than he was maybe even 10 years ago because of the climate that we live in. So I think he would be proud of the work that we're doing. I think he would be proud of the work that the country's starting to do, realizing that we kind of need to get back on track. I
Yeah,
think I think he would, and he said it, I don't know how many times in his speech that, right, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And it's something that you have to fight for. We don't live in this great country with all the things that all the freedoms that we have because of nothing, right? We have to work for it. And so I think he'd also be shocked that we've gotten to the point that we've gotten to, but he'd be happy that we're making our way back. I think his legacy, I think with us, we know the things that were on his heart that were important to him. And one thing that was important to him were the veterans. And
mm,
another thing that was always important, which ties into the military was always such a focal point, and the veterans. So that's why our foundation, we do a lot of work with World War II vets, helping the veterans, and then also a lot of donations to the USS Reagan for continuing education of those sailors. So those are things, and then just speaking on him, letting people remember the man that he was and what we need to do to make sure as a country to make sure that we don't get too far away from that.
yeah. Well, I appreciate the work that you guys do with the veterans, and I appreciate what he did with that too. Because my wife's a Marine veteran of 11 years,
Oh,
so she served proudly, and I always think it's amazing when you have somebody that really highlights the importance of that, because sometimes I think that we forget that the
yeah,
veterans are the ones that put their life on the line to protect this
yeah.
country. And I think if your grandfather was still here today, I would love to hear one of his speeches again. I could only imagine what he would say if he was still here and could speak to just the division that our country is in right now. It'd probably almost be one of those Gorbachev tear down that wall of division kind of thing. So I could easily see him if he was still here today,
He,
speaking out against the division that we have, and it's not even on a foreign land. It's here in our
I
own.
know, I know it's right on our own soil, and I think he mastered a way of being able to work with people on all sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think he's one of the last presidents that was able to really do that in a way, because the party lines were kind of blurred back then.
yeah,
Uh, nothing like it is now. So
no,
I
it's
appreciate everything that he did, because I still, like I told you before, I feel that his actions while he was in office still reverberate now. And just to look back on what he did, as an American, I'm proud of what your grandfather did during his presidency, and just his advocacy for everything else that he did in life. So, Ashley, thank
many
you
of those
so much.
speeches, so many of those speeches in the film, I feel like you could play today and they would be just as relevant, unfortunately. Where I don't think he would have thought that, that 40 years later, we'd kind of be coming full circle to where some of those points would maybe even be relevant today.
Yeah, it's just sad. But I always tell people, I'm like, the things that we don't have control over, we just have to pray and let God deal with those things. So our country needs a lot of prayers. Let's just leave it at that. And
They do.
but I appreciate you joining us today. I appreciate
Thank you
everything
so
that you're
much.
doing to keep your
Thank
grandfather's legacy alive. And the movie, if you have not seen the Reagan film yet, it is a phenomenal film. Dennis Quaid knocked it out of the park on this. Sean McNamara did a great job directing this film.
you.
So go check it out. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you so much for having me. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.